A few weeks ago, Luke and I set out to see if we could beat the original Halo trilogy without firing a weapon. And you guys all know what type of roller coaster of emotions that was. And while we were able to look through the first 3 Halo games and see what could and couldn't be done, we didn't get a chance to actually look at the other Bungie Halo games that were released after Halo 3. So after taking some time to cool down, relax, and reflect on the grand adventure we did with the Halo trilogy, we are back at it again to see if you can beat Halo 3 ODST and Halo Reach without firing a weapon. So, without further ado, Halo 3 ODST is up first, and this one was definitely interesting. We knew going into Halo 3 ODST we would be faced with some challenges like the firefights and just the way that health management works a little bit differently in Halo 3 ODST, and after watching the really cool opening cutscene, we dropped into Mombasa streets for the first time. And actually, this part was relatively easy as there were minimal enemies, and we just kinda wandered around until we found that recon helmet that you need to activate the actual first level of Halo 3 ODST, which brought us to Tayari Plaza, where we play as Buck. For this level, honestly, we were kind of surprised how easy it was because we just ran past everything without really fighting anything. We kind of acted like we were some extreme speedrunners for a few moments and acted like we knew what we were doing and actually made our way through the level relatively easy, just kind of avoiding the major enemies and sprinting past hunters before they could wreck us. After we completed that level, it was back to Mombasa streets again where we walked around some more until we found something else, and then we loaded into Uplift Reserve, which is kind of the massive driving level of Halo 3 ODST. And honestly, we just hopped in a Warthog and drove through the level, and once we got to the end of the level, we wanted to see if it was actually possible to finish the level without driving over the jump, so just for fun, we kind of walked off the cliff at the end, but hey, it worked. After that, we were back to Mombasa streets for part 3, and my notes here don't really say we did anything other than had a heated debate about Halo 5 loot boxes, so I assume we just walked around some more before we finally found the next clue. Once loading up in Kazingo Boulevard, we actually thought this level would be a little more risky than some of the other levels we had seen from Halo 3 ODST so far, as it's the tank level, and since we can't shoot the tank, we decided our best bet was to walk. Now, there are a lot of vehicles that drive by because they expect you to be in a tank, so some of the biggest threats we were faced with was the possibility of getting randomly splattered by a vehicle, and there's also some jackal snipers who will take you out and ruin your day. One other challenging part is the main plaza section where you finally reunite with Dutch, and as long as you take out the 2 wraiths quickly and kill a few extras, you can actually progress to the next section of the level. However, if you try to run past it not taking out the wraiths, you kind of have to wait around for a while, and we learned that the hard way. The final firefight actually isn't too hard in this section of the level. If you use the cover that is in the park area and you quickly take out the wraith and enemies, you can actually get through this part by relying on some of the AI to hopefully kill the harder enemies or the ones that have more ranged weapons. Going on to Mombasa streets for part 4, this section just featured more enemies, but it literally still was a walk in the park. Moving on to Oni Alpha site, fortunately, setting up the breach charges at the beginning of this level where you're on the bridge doesn't count as shooting unless in your regular day-to-day vocabulary you would say you shoot a breach charge. It doesn't really make sense. So this part was actually relatively easy. Dropping back to the next area, there's actually a lot of firefights. The hunters here are actually really challenging when you run out of grenades and you're just bouncing around them trying to kill them. It honestly takes forever, but we were able to still manage them. When we got to the indoor section where you have to hold out before the elevator, there's a lot of brutes that come in, and your best bet is to try to sneak up behind them and go for a quick assassination, or when they spot you, just quickly punch for your life and hope it works out. Then afterwards, the hardest part is going in the elevator ride when a ton of buggers spawn and they're shooting at you and you don't have a lot of areas to go to, but our best method was just to kind of walk side to side and punch them when they got low enough and hope that our teammates shot them out of the air and they weren't dumb AIs. Onward to Mombasa Streets Part 5, which is just more Mombasa streets, walking around and getting lost some more. On the level NMPD, this was the first level we were actually worried about. With the big firefight and snipers everywhere, we knew it would only be getting worse going forward. We made our way through the main tower area area, and we just punched where we could and dodged snipers without falling off buildings. And the final firefight, we were prepared that it could get really difficult as there's a ton of banshees flying around, and since we can't shoot, we just kind of have to hope we don't die. But fortunately enough, our teammates kind of did it on their own. Honestly, it took them forever to get through all of this, and it can be really boring. But hey, this level is good for taking a break, refilling your Mountain Dew Code Red, contemplating your life choices, whatever your thing is, this level is for that. But we knew moving forward, as we were approaching the later section of this game, things would only be getting harder, and we'd be faced with some big challenges sooner than later. But first, we were back to Mombasa Streets Part 6, back to getting lost again, and then we were on Kikowani Station, and this was a level we were worried about because it typically requires you to clear enemies to load the next part of the level, allowing the phantom that has your teammates in it to move up. And since we're going to be in banshees and we can't shoot, it would definitely be slightly problematic. We also knew there would be a scarab later in the level and some other things we'd have to blow up along the way, so we were really trying to strategize what would be the best method here. As you fly through clearing areas for your phantom to move up, there's wraiths, fuel rod grunts, fuel rod wraiths, and it can get hectic because respawning on this level is really weird. So when one of us died, it was unlikely the other person would respawn in a relatively normal fashion. We always had to play around with the respawning, and sometimes just you're out of luck, you wouldn't respawn. Our best bet was to just land our banshees, jump out, and try to take out enemies or wraiths. We kind of had to do the same thing when we got to the scarab. Luke was dead, unfortunately, so it was all up to me to be the hero. So I flew my banshee, landed on the scarab, and quickly ran away from the enemies and punched the battery thing and dove out last second because I was unsure whether or not I actually had activated the scarab's destruction. But hey, we made it, and Luke was finally able to respawn after I got through that. But we still knew we would be faced with one more thing, where at the end of the level there's a ton of hives that are set up that you have to destroy to set off a chain reaction that lets you escape out of the building. We honestly knew this would be pretty problematic going in, and Luke and I were going to have to come up with a strategic plan for how we were going to trigger this chain reaction without actually firing a weapon. But before we could actually talk about a strategy, Luke executed his own plan. Hey, it worked. After we cleared that, we were on to Mombasa Streets Part 7. Almost there. Just a little more Mombasa Street stuff. Once we cleared that section, we entered the data hive, which really just involved a lot of punching. The buggers are a little annoying throughout this level, and in the final area, it can get pretty chaotic as we knew there would be a chieftain coming up, and we know chieftains can be pretty threatening as they have gravity hammers and invincibility. But you know what? It's okay to have a little calm before the chaos, as we knew that the last level of ODST would be hard, and we just kind of enjoyed the usage of the tunnels in the earlier section, sneaking our way through before we knew the chaos that would ensue later on in the level. As we continued to progress through the level, we knew that that final firefight was getting closer and that chieftain would be really threatening. As we finally got to the end section, we got kind of lucky fighting the chieftain. So then we got to Virgil and we saved him, and while he is one of the greatest characters in Halo history, hands down, he definitely takes forever to follow you and open the door, but maybe we were just being a little impatient. Next, we made our way into Coastal Highway, which we were really worried about with navigating the city, trying to keep Virgil and Dare alive in the escort section, and we honestly were trying to put together how on earth we were going to protect Virgil and Dare without shooting weapons when there's so many different types of enemies that'll be shooting at the elephant that they're in on the highway. But then as we got to the highway section, we remembered that Buck has an aimbot, and honestly, while a little tricky at times, we gotta just breeze through it. Fuel rod grunts can be tricky, and as you get to bigger enemies where you're supposed to be in a tank, it can get a little bit harder, but fortunately using a gauze hog can make it easier. It takes a little bit of trial and error at times, but the biggest risk honestly ended up getting close to being crushed by Dare at times. The final firefight, however, was actually a pretty difficult challenge. We had to make sure no enemies rushed Virgil, which does happen, and it was kind of a constant bouncing around match and punching enemies, dodging them, and fighting our way wave after wave before finally getting rescued. And yes, we were able to beat Halo 3 ODST without shooting, and this was a pretty big accomplishment. We were glad to be able to add this game to the list of games that you can complete without shooting, but we still have Halo Reach to go, and we know Halo Reach is definitely going to be a step up in challenge, considering Reach Reach is significantly longer than Halo 3 ODST. It has different mechanics from Halo 3 ODST, and across the board, we were going to be faced with some things that we've never even seen before going into it. So, starting things off on Winter Contingency, we punched the MOAs, as you should, and while a lot of people hated sprinting in Halo, we actually noticed it was kind of useful here, making the gameplay a little bit more exciting since you can't shoot. At least we now have the ability to chase enemies down, to punch and assassinate them, and meanwhile on the Winter Contingency level, firefighting was a little boring. We kind of have to wait for Kat to do her thing, which is always a blast, but at the very least, after the cool cutscene, there's a forklift, which proves to be the superior form of getting through the rest of this level without shooting. We were able to kill the last couple of elites and complete Winter Contingency without any real problems. Moving forward to Sword Base, we realized that we would have to utilize a target locator, and we know that a target locator was a weapon, and we weren't really sure if it counted as shooting or not. After some debate, we decided target locators definitely count as shooting if we were to fire it. So instead, we opted out to using the good old-fashioned wombo combo to take out the wraiths, and just took our time taking out all of the massive enemies that would have been a lot easier to use a target locator with, but we just did without. Fighting against the hunters in Halo Reach was a little intimidating, as we weren't sure if they were going to work more closely with how they work in Halo 3 or in Halo 2, because in Halo 2 you can't even do any real damage with a melee on a hunter, so we kind of just hoped for the best, and we threw grenades and punched, and eventually the hunters died, so we were pretty happy about that. When we got to the actual Sword Base tower section, we kind of just ran past all of the enemies hoping for the best, and then we just had to sit up there and wait for our teammates to take out the Phantom before we were able to complete the level. We actually weren't sure if the level would progress if we didn't shoot at the Phantom, but eventually the Phantom exploded and we were good to go to level 3. The level Nightfall was a little bit annoying having to play through this without shooting, as there's a bunch of snipers around and there's a lot of ranged enemies because you're supposed to have a sniper, but we can't actually snipe things. We were a little intimidated when we saw these big boys, so we just naded them and punched them and hoped for the best, and sure enough they died. When we got to the level Tip of the Spear, our strategy was to jump in a Warthog and use Kat, who is an NPC who essentially would be invincible on this level, to get into the turret to shoot. However, because there's some random Marine that likes to sit in the turret spot, Kat seemed to refuse every time we tried to get her to get into the vehicle with us, so finally we decided that the Marine was dismissed from duty, and Kat finally jumped in our vehicle with us and did a lot of the shooting. When we got to the AA towers, we just threw a grenade in the fuel cell, and it was pretty easy to destroy. And then as we moved forward, we just kind of ran, punched, naded, and hoped that our Marines were somehow more competent than us once we reached the second spire. When we got to the flying section, this was something that we thought would be a really difficult challenge, and it kind of was. This section requires you to clear several waves of enemies by shooting at them when you're in the Falcon, and the enemies shoot at you a lot. And this definitely would probably be impossible on Legendary or Heroic difficulty to get through it without shooting, but honestly there's nothing you can do to get around it. If you go out of the map, it won't trigger the cutscene that loads the next section of the level, so we just kind of hope for the best, and sure enough we actually survived this part. We don't know how, but it worked. So then afterwards we got to the spire section. We flew up to the top of the tower. I had a very awkward encounter with a bunch of elites before Luke finally showed up, and otherwise we were able to complete this level also without shooting. Then we got to Long Night of Solace. Okay, this level is action-packed and there's a lot of different elements going on in this. We ran through the early section the same way we had run through most of Halo Reach so far, and when we got to the ship part, we were pretty worried this would be the run ender, as there's a lot of enemies flying around that you have to be able to take out on your own before triggering the next section of the level. So at the beginning, the tutorial tells you that you have to shoot, and we weren't sure if it would load the next part, so we kind of just floated there in space hoping that it would time itself out, and sure enough it did time itself out. We didn't actually have to shoot for it to start the next section of the level, and then it faced us with a big firefight where we're supposed to defend our ships against several Banshees. This part's tricky because you really don't have any additional help. The Banshees shoot at you and you can't shoot back. So then after a long time of trying to figure out what our options were, we actually realized we could boost our ships into enemy ships to destroy them. So it ended up being this really long, tedious process of us flying after Banshees, crashing into them, and hoping they exploded and not us. But it worked, and it kind of becomes this intense game of hide and go seek tag. You do have to eliminate all of the targets, so make sure you don't crash into your teammates whenever you are trying to help. After clearing the first wave of Banshees, then, to make things even harder, Seraphs come in, and this was an earth-shattering discovery because they have shields. You have to take down the shields first before you can do any damage, and are much faster than Banshees. We thought that this was it, this would be the end of our run, until we saw one of them crash and oof itself, so we knew there was a chance. We tried a few things where we would fly around obstacles, hoping they would crash and blow up, but it didn't turn out to be as useful as we hoped it would be, and it was a little bit tedious. Fortunately enough, we did realize that if we boosted right into the back of their engines, it could cause an explosion with a 50-50 chance of blowing yourself up, but hey, it actually worked since the NPCs are really useful. But nothing is more heartbreaking when after you made it through all of this, going through all of the tedious stuff, that another wave of enemies come, which are the Phantoms. Okay, so then a fleet of Phantoms come in, and if we thought the Seraphs and the Banshees were rough, these things are really tanky and we just don't have the firepower, and while we do have a ship that shoots at them, the Phantoms have shields. However, after a while of flying around and seeing what our options were, we realized that we could bump into the Phantoms temporarily if we don't hit them too hard and cause them to kind of spin out of control. Then what we started doing is, while our mothership is shooting at a specific Phantom, if we flew up to the Phantom and slightly bumped it out of control, it would actually reduce its shields and allow our mothership to take out the Phantoms. There's a ton of Phantoms, so we had to actually systematically outspin each ship to get through it. We went ship to ship, trying to spin them to make sure we had them all destroyed without shooting. Finally, we cleared the first section of this level. We got a nice cutscene. We were feeling good that we could actually get through this level, which we thought would be game breaking. And then there was another flying part after all of that. And this is a part that we just honestly could not figure out what to do or what the best method would be to take out this next section, the Corvette. This thing has us needing to take out the engines, and we couldn't figure out a way to take the engines out. We tried flying into them and blowing ourselves up, hoping it would do the damage to the engines and we could just respawn and take them out, which did not work. We tried glitching into the next part of the level, hoping it would trigger the cutscene. That didn't work. We tried flying enemies around to follow us, hoping they would shoot at it and do damage, and that didn't work either. And honestly, after spending probably an hour on this section alone, we came to the conclusion that you cannot complete Halo Reach without firing a weapon, as you have to shoot at the Corvette's engine to trigger the next section of the level, thus completely ending our Halo Reach run, and we were pretty disappointed. But while you do have to shoot here, this turned into the question, can you at least beat Halo Reach without shooting an actual gun? Can we get further in the game? How far can we get if we excluded this level? We were able to complete the rest of the level, moving us onto the level Exodus, which wasn't too bad other than the suicide grunts, which are kind of scary at times as they get close, and you have to be careful not to kill civilians because Halo Reach will just kill you out of the blue for that. But fortunately, since it's the introduction to the brutes, they drop gravity hammers, which makes this level a whole lot easier. And while you do have a Falcon ride that you're supposed to shoot as you are being escorted to a different section of the level, you kind of just get to ride along and watch people die. The final firefight on this level is a little bit chaotic, but doable if you go after the wraiths first. Moving on to the level New Alexandria. Honestly, this one's just a little tedious, but it's not too hard. You just kind of hop in the Falcon, go for a ride, let your Marines do all the shooting, go building to building, punch everything, and sure enough, this level can be cleared pretty easily as well. Moving forward to the package, it's a lot of the same old that we had on the level Sword Base. There is a big section where everything is shooting you at once and you have to wait to fight your way through, and you have to wait for your teammates to come and help you out, and pretty annoying, but it's definitely not impossible. In the final firefight, since we can't shoot, our method was to run turret to turret, keeping them all activated, as it's a decent strategy, besides just, you know, punching your way through everything and kind of hoping for the best. But hey, it's always nice playing through a whole game without shooting, just to finally get an energy sword for the first time, which would have been really helpful in both Halo games, at the very end of the second to last level. But either way, we were finally moving on to Pillar of Autumn, the epic conclusion to Halo Reach. Now, fortunately enough, this level is easy enough if you focus on your awesome mongoose driving skills, or even better, forklift driving skills. Carter took our strategy of not shooting pretty seriously too, even though he shot a couple shots, but he took the idea and the ideology of it and executed it perfectly. We fought through some lag and ran past as many enemies, and we jumped through windows to avoid hunters, but we continued on. The firefight at the end isn't too bad either, utilizing either swords or gravity hammers you find along the way, but then we were faced with another major problem, and this is one we were worried about before we even started Reach. We thought this would actually be the issue we ran into, besides the one that we actually ran into earlier, where you have to take over for a meal on the Mac gun, and it's a required part of the game, despite our attempts to glitch past it, not shoot anything or do anything, to shoot at the Corvette in the sky, letting the Pillar of Autumn escape. So while we tried everything, we tried sitting there just not shooting, the game will actually just kill you, and it's a wipe if you don't shoot quick enough. So unfortunately, you absolutely have to shoot the Mac gun one time to complete this level. So despite us getting stuck on Solace, had we found a way to destroy the Corvette engines, it wouldn't have mattered because you actually can't beat Halo Reach without shooting either way. Meanwhile, you get to Lone Wolf, and well, this one's actually really easy to beat without shooting. You just kind of die and then you beat it. But either way, we completed Halo Reach and Halo 3 ODST to the best that we could without shooting. We now know that Halo 3 ODST can be completed without shooting, while Halo Reach unfortunately requires 2 shots if you want to complete the game. But what did you guys think of this run? Would you ever try to do a no-shoot run in Halo? Let us know what you think in the comments down below. If you haven't checked out the runs we did, like this video on Halos 1, 2, and 3, we have a dedicated video just for that. If you have other games you'd like to see us give a shot of this challenge, let us know. Be sure to subscribe with notifications for more videos like this. We'll see you guys all next time with a brand new video. Bye guys.